Hello, hello. This is Tyler with Analytive.com, and you are listening to the Analytive Podcast. Today, we have a very, very special guest joining us. He's a gentleman that I met a few months ago at an event called 1 Million Cups. So 1 Million Cups is sort of a pitch event where new businesses can come in and practice their pitch, get feedback in local community. They meet all over the nation. We met at the one here in Fort Collins, Colorado, where we are both based. So Lucas and his wife, Brittany, are originally from Round Lake, Illinois. They moved to Fort Collins back in 2011. They had a son, Avery, who was born in 2017 and recently welcomed their daughter, Emma, in early 2019. Congrats on that. In addition to hanging out as a family, they both play sports, try new restaurants, hike, visit the local outdoor movie theater. We do have a drive-in movie theater here, which is awesome. They run, play video games, and travel. So Lucas is a certified financial planner, which is why I wanted to have him on the podcast to talk today about financial planning and about especially financial planning for small business owners, which is something that's near and dear to my heart as a small business owner. Lucas's financial interest was originally rooted in his first few years of employment at a local community bank back in Illinois. After he discovered the impact of financial planning and what it can have on people's lives, he moved to Fort Collins to attend Colorado State with a focus on financial planning. Following that, Lucas worked for a top firm here in the northern Colorado area, which he talks a little bit about. But then wanting to make an even bigger impact on people's lives, he launched on his own and launched LevelUP Financial Planning to bring financial planning to young professionals and growing families. So we have a great interview for you with Lucas. I love what he has to say, especially there's a very insightful piece toward the end about whether you should invest in your own business or invest in the stock market, and how he kind of differentiates those things. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Lucas, and here is our interview with him. Quick disclaimer. In this podcast, we get into investment strategy. Everything in this podcast is our opinion and should be taken as such. I'm not licensed or equipped to give financial advice. Assume all the strategies we discuss are extremely risky and you could lose all your money, so do your own research before implementing anything you hear. And with that, on to the podcast. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Analytive Podcast. I'm here with Lucas Casarez. He is a friend of mine. We met Lucas, I think, a couple of months ago at 1 Million Cups. You came and spoke about LevelUP Financial Planning. So you're a certified financial planner. Obviously, everybody heard your bio in the intro, so they have at least a little bit of background of what you do. But beyond the kind of the general bio, I'd just like to know a little bit about you. Like, who do you say that you are? I mean, tell me about your business, your life. I know you're here in Fort Collins. I'm also in Fort Collins. But yeah, just do a quick introduction for people who aren't familiar with you at all.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a certified financial planner. Been doing financial planning for the last 4.5 years now. And so prior to that, I've always worked in financial industry ever since I graduated high school. I worked in community banks, credit unions, trying to figure out what I was trying to do for my career. I then transitioned into financial planning once I figured that all out. And that took a couple moves from Illinois to Fort Collins, Colorado, where I live. And surprisingly, only a few of my clients are here locally. A lot of my clients are kind of spread either a little bit further south in Denver, Arizona, Illinois, New York, and California. So I work virtually. So that's one thing. We'll probably dig into it a little bit later. That makes my company a little bit more unique is I operate 100% virtually, which gives me a lot of flexibility to meet the types of clients I want to work with, basically.
Yeah, very cool. And you said you came up through banking. So my background, my very first job in high school was actually as a bank teller. So I understand that world. I spent, I think, about 1.5 2 years there. So how did you get from banking? Because I was looking on your LinkedIn. So you started as a teller, moved up into, I think, personal banker. Every kind of bank is a different term, right?
Yeah.
Moved there. So then how did you make the jump from the banking world to the financial planning world?
Yeah. So way back when I was still in early community college time, trying to figure out what I want to do. I was just kind of doing a general business courses, trying to figure it out while working at the bank. And there was a couple of job opportunities that were starting to open up. And although as the higher type performer, within being a teller and then being like a teller manager, there was definitely a ceiling until I finished a degree. And
Right.
so I was taking too long getting through that, got a little bit frustrated with seeing that it's going to be a while before I'm able to kind of move on and continue to grow. And during that time, I was trying to figure out what I actually wanted to do. A lot of people told me I should be an accountant because I was good with money and enjoyed math and stuff like that. And even though that probably used to be my type of behavior, probably would have been a good fit for who I used to be, I've just grown and changed pretty dramatically than what would have been a good fit for being an accountant, kind of sitting behind the desk all the time. And that kind of developed through that banking experience. I was building a lot of relationships with people, seeing all the cool different ways people handle their money, sometimes not cool. And
Right.
so gave me a lot of insight. And then I saw too that there's a lot of people I didn't know what they were doing. One of the great things that the bank I worked at back in Illinois, they had a great employee stock purchase plan. They had a great 401k. And so I started learning about all those things while trying to figure out what I was doing in school. And then once I was talking to some of the older people I was working with, because I was only like 19, 20, figuring these things out. And I was talking to people in their 40s and 50s, like, hey, this is cool. Like, how are you guys doing this? And what are you guys doing? And they're like, we don't know. We just kind of just do like whatever and just kind of just guess and try to figure it out. I'm like, it seems kind of important, especially for someone that's a little bit older, to be more aware of what's going on. And so that's kind of what opened my eyes to the possibility of financial planning and what that could look like. And once I did the research, I knew I wanted to move out to Colorado, and Colorado State University had a financial planner program that allowed me to take the certified financial planner exam. So that's kind of how all those things lined up and moved down that direction.
Cool. And you mentioned, a personal change, right? When you started, everybody said, hey, you should go into accounting. And you said that would have been a good fit for who you used to be, compared to like who you are now. Like, what was that change? What was maybe happening in your life personally or professionally that caused sort of that change to happen?
Yeah, so really interesting. I don't know. So there's an event that happens here in Fort Collins. You might be familiar with it, and it happens around the world actually too. It's called Pachakacha. So I actually spoke as to like some of the things that happened and caused me to really change who I was as a person. One of them was one of my childhood friends, like best friend from childhood, ended up passing away like really young. He was 21, so I was about 21 as well. And that was kind of when I was trying to figure everything out. And it really made me want to just focus in on what mattered. That's when I started getting a lot more detailed on what I wanted my future to look like, how to make the most of every day and every opportunity. So those things like just started shifting pretty dramatically. And I realized that for a lot of things I wanted to do, I couldn't be like my passive, introverted self to make the most and get the most out of life. And so I still feel like I'm an introvert, because even though I do stuff like this now, be on podcasts, speak in front of a lot of people, I really need that downtime to kind of recharge. And then I'm more than happy to just hang out with my family all week long, and other than client meetings, just not do anything too active or put myself out there.
Right.
But yeah, that's one thing I can definitely point to that made that huge dramatic shift. And I think it was just at a pivotal point in time I was trying to figure out things. And then something like that occurred, and it really opened up my eyes to how no one really knows how much time was left, and how to just, you should be trying to make the most and enjoy life to the maximum.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think there's a concept, I think a lot of people mistake introversion for passivity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those are two really, really distinct things, right? Like because I'm probably more of an introvert again. Like we have a remote team. So I'm, on the phone with clients or in client offices from time to time, but generally I'm doing a lot of writing, team management, project management. I mean, I'm working, in our office, right? Within my office, my home office. And so I understand that, it's sort of like a breathing, like inhale ideas and concepts and thoughts, and then exhale when you're with people, whether it's family or professional contacts or even just friends and hanging out. So I understand very much where you're coming at with that. And tragedy is never fun, but it's amazing sometimes the benefits, and the benefits is the changes, the positive changes, right, that can come out of that. Because I've had my own share of challenges. Actually, when I started Analytive, a much less dramatic, but it was when I lost a job, right? So it was
Mm-hmm.
nothing compared to losing a friend, but still at the time seemed like a really big deal. But that pushed me then to start Analytive, to branch out on my own. And again, that was kind of my moment, like you said, where you went from like, oh, like this is life and it's limited, right? And so I want to make the most out of the time that I have.
Yeah, and the way I kind of see it is those dramatic or traumatic events like really change people one way or another, and you can choose how you want to let it change you. Like, do you want to kind of force you into a positive direction, or you're just going to slink backwards and just be afraid of doing things? And so, yeah, people are always going to have to make those choices, and you're not always going to make the same types of choices, but more times than not, if you choose to grow from those things and just take what you can, whether it's a good experience or a bad experience, it's kind of all about growing. And you do that in your finances, your personal life, and careers, and all those different things.
Sure. Yeah. So that was the shift that got you into financial planning, right? And when you went through that time, is that correct?
Yeah, it's all those things kind of melded together at the same time. So it wasn't his passing that made me do that, but it made me get more focused into what I wanted to do. At the same time, I was realizing that I really enjoyed learning about the 401k, the employer stock purchase plan. By that point, I was a few years into being a bank teller and seeing a lot of the different handlings and usage of credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, and then all those things actually were happening too during the financial crisis. So that, like when I was 21, that was about 2008, 2009 timeframe. So
Yeah.
a lot of pretty pivotal things that impacted my career choice at that point, which do you think like that would be a time where people would be afraid to go into the industry. But I kind of looked at it how most people should look at it during those downturns, as an opportunity. And I was able to benefit too. Like I had a lot more confidence moving out to Colorado, even at a younger age, because of some of the investment choices I made when I was 21,
Right.
which is crazy. And when things ended up bouncing back, by the time I was moving out to Colorado when I was 24, I had a lot more money than I would have just had if I just saved outright and didn't try invest in.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember as a bank teller too, I mean, you kind of see the gamut of how humans treat money, right?
Yep.
I mean, we would have guys that would come in that were, sometimes had great jobs, right? Where they would be making a pretty decent chunk of change, but, didn't have an account with us, but they would just bring the check, they pay the $2 fee every other Friday, cash the check, and just take it all cash and walk out, and then they just do that over and over. Whereas then you had people, I remember we had actually a guy who I think was a UPS driver, right? I remember he came in, deposited his check. He'd always take a little bit of cash, but most of it would just go right into the account. I think had over $100,000. I mean, this was like, 15 years ago, when $100,000 was even then a lot more than it is today.
Yeah,
Right?
it's
Just
like
sitting
$200,000 today.
yeah, in a checking account, which isn't necessarily the best way to invest at all. But the fact is, he was good enough with money and he didn't spend it, so he was very disciplined in the way that he did it. And then you had, people who had all the loans, the car loan, the home equity loan. You, as a bank teller, you just get to see sort of the inside of like what is working and what's not. It's almost every potential person that comes in is like a mini case study in managing your finances.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I always kind of point to is making me a little bit more unique. Just I was in the banking industry while I was kind of working my way through college for about 8 years. And so, yeah, I saw a lot of different things all during the financial crisis, all during the recovery. And yeah, just really eye-opening. So I feel like that's made me a little bit more unique than someone that kind of tries to do or is doing something similar to what I'm doing. I just have a little bit more insight and kind of all those micro interactions of how people have handled money over that time frame.
Yeah, for sure. So when you got into financial planning, you were working for somebody else for a few years. Is that correct?
Yeah, about 3 years.
Okay. And then at some point you decided to launch LevelUP, which is your consultancy, if you will, your company now. So talk to me about that transition, if you would. What happened during that time, or how did you get the courage to actually jump on your own and say, "Hey, I think I can do this"?
It's crazy. There's so many different things that kind of forced me into it, and I'll just kind of name off a few, and then maybe dive into one or two of those a little bit deeper. But um, so I had student loans
Hmm.
going through college. No financial planners at the time really helped people with that. Uh, I was getting married, ended up purchasing a house, ended up having a child. Um, I told you I moved across the country. So all these things happened when I was a young adult, and all of them have major dramatic financial impacts and
Hmm.
really changes what your financial abilities are if you make the wrong step, if you make the wrong misstep. And what I was finding is there's a lot of people similar to me that had no clue. They had no interest in money first, which doesn't help matters. But then also there's not that education in school to give people even like a baseline of like, this is how you should view money, this is how you should treat money. And so I just know that there's a lot of people out there floundering and they just don't really have that direction. So that's the overarching thing is I felt there's a huge need that most financial planners are not going to talk to someone unless they're going to get paid like $5,000 a year, which isn't necessarily going to fit a lot of the people in their 20s and even 30s or 40s sometimes if they have kind of kids going through or they're starting to have kids. Kids are the most expensive time of their life. And so really a lot of people don't even get back on track if they weren't doing the right things early on until they're in their 50s and their kids move out. And so people need to understand what they can be doing in that time frame. So I'm not trying to be the lowest cost option, but I am trying to create a different alternative option for people that actually want that kind of more coaching, education, and direction to say, hey, if we do these things now, you're going to be so much off better. You're going to have a lot more flexibility, a lot more control and confidence over your financial situation. So that's really the overarching thing. And then, just a few things that gave me the courage, I guess. So I was super surprised my wife supported me on this. This wouldn't be something that she would normally be like, oh yeah, walk away from your income, which I had worked my way into making it very sizable and very nice. And I wasn't happy with my employer, kind of the values or the direction of business it was going.
Hmm.
Um, some of that has to do with money. Some of that has to do with a few other things that were going on there. And
Sure.
so I was looking for different opportunities too. So I knew that wasn't going to be a good fit for me long term, just because I just wasn't feeling like I was supposed to be there doing those types of things. Um, so I had a couple of different opportunities come up that were really great opportunities, but they were kind of more traditional, like go work in the trust department, build all these financial plans for rich people. It's
Hmm.
like, yeah, I'd get paid well and do that, but really, like my wife and I have tried to take good control over our financial situation so we can have more confidence and not feel like we're relying on a certain pay and things like that. So that was something that basically we ended up turning down a lot of great opportunities because I felt like if I did something like that, it was going to be too cushy, too relaxing, and I would never be able to do what ultimately Level Up Financial Planning became, which is being that platform to help people wherever they're at. Some of my clients are in their mid 40s and they're just haven't even got started yet, but a financial planner wouldn't talk to them. So yeah, those are the main things. I then also just set an example for my son. He was 4 months when 4 months old when we decided to go ahead and start my company. And again, it was just kind of wanting to set the example, going back to my friend and how that made me want to make the most out of my life. I want to kind of share with that, hopefully without me passing away, that my
Right.
my son and like my family, people in my circle, see me going after what I think is important and valuable, and it's not about the money, it's about the impact that I'm able to make. So I want my son, whatever he ends up wanting to do, and I've had a daughter since then recently too. I want them both to feel like whatever they feel is important, that they're passionate about, they should take a chance at, regardless of the financial situation.
Yeah, that's great. And I understand that because when I launched Analytive, there were a couple other people, even a family member, who, because of my experience in doing it and a little bit of my trying to encourage them, ended up launching their own thing as well in their particular industry. And it's very freeing, because I grew up and I didn't really know entrepreneurs, small business owners. Like, there was like a guy at church that owned a gas station, but you didn't see the inside, how things actually functioned and all that. I had great parents, but they were very well employed. My mom was a teacher and my dad, a manager at a big manufacturing organization. And so you saw like, oh, what does it look like, the 9 to 5 thing, but you never saw the entrepreneurship side. And so I think that's really cool that you've taken that step so that now your family, your kids, right, know that that's an option in the future as well, that maybe they wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people are down on the future potential of the economy, of job opportunities, of education and things like that. But I'm like forever an optimist. I could care less what all the negative things are. So
Yeah.
I'm really excited for how dramatically different things are going to be. I don't know what it was making me think about it, but just like 20, 30 years ago, the internet wasn't really even anything like what it is now. Like it didn't exist about 30 years ago in any type of sense that we would know or be familiar with. And then even early on, like the AOL, the dial-up types,
Oh, yeah.
like it's so much different, and it creates a lot of opportunities, and a lot of things are changing in the world. But I think that's exciting. So I'm excited for what the future could look like for them and what those different options and paths could look like.
Yeah, I mean, the iPhone came out in what, like 2007, like 12. This is 2019 when we're recording this, so that's 12 years ago. I mean, that's not that long ago in the whole scheme of things, considering how ubiquitous it is and how it changes everything, communication, not just communication, but how we navigate, how we communicate, just so much stuff.
Yep, I had one of those Sidekick phones, which had like an internet thing, but it's not the same as what an iPhone ended up being able to do.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's crazy. So as you've kind of branched out on your own, talk about, asking you to be maybe a little vulnerable, but what are some of the big challenges you face, right? So you went from having a pretty cushy salary, working
Yep.
for somebody else, but not a good fit for a variety of reasons, to like, okay, let's pull the trigger, jump out on my own, start, developing clients. Just talk to me about that process and some of the challenges.
So more than anything, it was just kind of that initial, I'd have to say probably like the initial 6 or 7 months. And there's a couple reasons for that. Um, when I told my previous employer that, you know what, I'm going to start my own company, it's going to be a little bit different. So I didn't think it was going to be too big of an issue. There was a couple of clients though, because I still have the capacity and I still enjoy working with some of my clients that I had in the past. I said, I would like to talk to these people, see if it would be a good fit. And ultimately, even though I was given 2 months notice and we were hoping that I was going to help with the training and getting stuff going for whoever my replacement was going to be, that 2 months notice became 2 days notice. So that was a big difference because the compliance and all the paperwork involved, there was a 2 month gap where I couldn't legally tell people what I was doing, ask for business, start to build business. My business wasn't going to be open until about that 2 month time period. All the paperwork process and everything was official. So that was the weirdest thing after being like a workaholic for such a long time. I was like trying to do all the back infrastructure things, and I got a lot of those things in place. But again, like a lot of stuff had to wait until I was official before I wanted to start paying for services that I wasn't going to be able to use for like 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
And so that was difficult. Then when I launched, another thing that kind of ties into my previous employer, which was super disappointing. When you're a financial planner, you have the option to help manage investments as well. You never want the advisor to hold the investments. You want them to be custodied at a larger financial institution. So TD Ameritrade is who I was going to use. I was kind of pre-approved, already set up on their platform. Basically, they just had to push a button once my compliance stuff was through. And after that happened, I ended up not hearing from them for 2.5 weeks, I think, after I launched. So I was all excited, started getting a couple of clients, wanted to get on their platform and saying, oh, what's going on? You guys said it was like a 24-hour thing after I notified you, and they just weren't responding. And ultimately what happened is previous employer, because he is a larger company and he used TD Ameritrade as well, He said, if you let him on the platform, we are going to take our clients and leave. And so when I'm doing something drastically different, certain the investments that I'm going to be holding with TD Ameritrade, it wasn't a smart decision for them to choose me over them when they had that ultimatum. And so that was jarring for all of, well, it's forever jarring. It definitely
Yeah.
disappoints like what I felt I meant for the company during the time I was with them. But then the reason why it was kind of temporary, one of the things that probably a lot of people, if you are entrepreneurs and you guys are listening to this, can relate to, is that the highest of highs and the lowest of lows sometimes can come on the same day. And it was that aspect where when I finally did get a call back and they told me that disappointed news, one of my first clients that was more in that 20 to 30-year-old trying to figure out what to do and do the right things and not make mistakes, ended up calling, became my first client that wasn't friends or family. And so like, it was cool that that happened so quickly, and that it's supporting a business model too. Cause the model I mentioned earlier, helping these younger professionals, isn't really a model that most financial advisors or planners would say is a sustainable one, or it's not going to make people ultra rich or wealthy, which is why most advisors don't do it. And so it was very gratifying to get that first client in that space where I really wanted to create that opportunity and access on that same day that I had the disappointing news.
Sure. Yeah. And it is amazing how so many highs and lows line up especially when you work for yourself. Like when you work for other people, it happens from time to time as well. But when you're the best of times, the worst of times, all at once. So then maybe let's transition a little bit, if we can, over to financial planning in general, right? And so as you're working, so I think my first question is, you mentioned earlier, some of the people that you like to work with or have worked with kind of come from a spot of not having a lot of interest generally in money. It's not something that they get super excited about, but it's still important for them to, to be able to plan for a future, right? Because we all need money basically to survive. So if you are dealing with somebody maybe in their 20s, 30s, and they're like, well, Lucas, I just don't have a lot of interest in money, or like, I'll start that when I'm 40, or I'll start that later. I mean, what do you say to those type of folks who, it's just not what they're naturally gifted at or naturally interested in?
Yeah. So ultimately I kind of have to find out what is important to them. And when you think about money, there's not too many decisions you make that doesn't impact money. If you decide to do one thing, especially with business owners, one thing other than another, your time is very valuable. So it's valuable in the sense of money, in a lot of cases, more for entrepreneurs than it is for just like an employee of a place. Like, sure, you can work overtime if that's an option, but normally you just work your 40-hour weeks or whatnot. But every financial decision that you make, or every decision you make, tends to be financially related. If you want to go for a walk today, well, you could have done something else where you spent money, or you could go and choose to get a Starbucks or whatever. And all these things really impact your life. And the stress that finances have, if you don't have confidence in your situation, is pretty dramatic. It's I think it is the leading stressor actually in the Americans today. And that's across all various types of income levels and thresholds. So it's not something that only the ultra poor are stressed out about it. There's a majority of the middle class are definitely stressed out about it as well. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is finding out what's important to them, and then just reminding them that it does have an impact. And if they're not confident about it, what are they allowing it to do? Is it impacting their relationships? Is it impacting their possibilities? That's something I'm always really excited to see, is like what's important to them, what's possible if we start making some of the right moves now. If early retirement is exciting, if traveling on a regular basis is exciting, a lot of these things are very possible and doable. It's just making sure that you understand what's going on, and then making that more informed decision to move closer towards your goal than towards just wasting money or using it on things that is just kind of not necessarily wasteful, but not adding the same amount of value of moving towards your goals and starting to get some confidence and some swagger to your financial situation.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. And then what about, for those type of people, right, who aren't super interested, I mean, do you recommend, automation? I mean, how involved do they have to be? Obviously, they have to adopt the behavior to a certain extent, but how much time does one need to spend on this? If you're like, I'm not super interested in money, but I want to make sure that when I get to 50, 60 years old, that I'm in a good, and good is relative, right, depending on the situation. But
Yep.
how much time do people need to dedicate to this? Is it something where they can just, tweak it every quarter or every month or every year? Or is it a daily thing that they have to be thinking about?
It definitely depends on the situation they're coming from. So if they have a complete kind of mess of a situation, just a lot of unclarity, definitely it's going to take a lot more time up front. And again, it's a very set amount of time. If you're able to focus and pour your energy into it and make sure that you get a good grasp of where things are, that's the biggest benefit sometimes of my clients is just understanding what both spouses or both significant others have in their financial situation. Because a lot of these decisions, financial decisions, are made siloed. Sometimes it's one spouse just makes all the financial decisions. Sometimes they're each responsible for their own half and no one knows what's going on. So that it's not clear. That's probably some of the reason why they're not confident. So getting organized, getting an idea of where their money is going and kind of how they're using it, that does take time to just kind of work through it. If people are consistent enough and committed to it enough, it doesn't have to take a lot of time. Just kind of committed a couple hours a week for the first 2 to 3 months, and you start to build those new habits, new behaviors, and then it starts to become second nature. You mentioned, Tyler, automation, and that's a key for anyone, whether you're starting out or not. If there's something you want to do, uh, don't give the possibility that you're not going to do it by not automating it. And what I've seen, and you probably saw this as well when you were working in the bank, uh, it's very easy for people to spend what they have in their checking account like clockwork. And so the best thing you can do is save first, spend on the things that are most important to you. And if there's money available at the end of the month, then that's kind of more of your fun money. But you know that you've taken care of that savings aspect, the important things earlier on before you spend it. Because if you try to put the savings at the end of that kind of process, you get to the end of the month and it's like, well, I can go on a weekend trip or I can save this extra $100. I'm going on the weekend trip because it's
Right.
there, right? So automation at the beginning of when you're receiving your pay is definitely important, and that's for all types of people, whether you're new, most seasoned people, most people that are doing really well with their finances. It is because they automate as much as possible, and then it really reduces down what you have to focus on too ultimately. So once you spend that time up front, it does, you can kind of check on it quarterly, or if you start to feel some weirdness, and then obviously people are always having changes throughout their life. So that's another time to check into. So
Yeah.
quarterly, or if a major change happens, that was something my family and I had to do when we're figuring, well, first when we were going to have our son, but then launching a business too. Like we have to tighten our financial situation. Yes, our income has increased dramatically over the last few years, but there could be a shift that I was leaning towards, and obviously having a kid, my wife stopped working when we did that too, so that was a shift in income. So we had to
Yeah.
have that confidence of what our financial spending was in order for us to enjoy having a kid and enjoy, or just have a little bit more confidence and lower stress levels when you're starting a business. Because having lack of confidence and more financial stress than you need to is not good to add on to trying to launch a business by any means.
For sure. And I like what you said about, the money in your checking account will spend it, because I see that it's this weird psychological thing. Whereas if I move it into an investment account or move it into a savings account, like literally I can, log into my online banking. And if I see the money there, like it will literally, how much money in that account, like for me is like, oh, like I'm doing really well, or like, oh, I'm not doing, like there's a psychological thing. So I know if I keep the amount of readily available, right? I mean, I can always transfer it out, but
Yep.
in my brain, right, if I keep that amount lower, then I tend to spend less and be a little more frugal and say, okay, is this worth it? Yes or no? And there's still things I spend money on because it's worth it. But yeah, it's amazing the psychological pieces with it. And I feel like financial planning isn't just structure, but so much of it is psychological and understanding your own psyche,
Yeah.
and like what makes you feel confident and comfortable, what makes you feel afraid, what makes you feel worried or concerned. Yeah.
And Tyler, so when you do kind of keep it leaner and um, kind of making more value-based kind of decisions on your spending during those time periods, do you feel ultimately that you end up buying things that are better, like provide more value, makes you feel good about the purchase?
I think so. I guess I haven't thought that much. I just know how much I spend, or I find that, yeah, I do buy a lot of like more random crap. Like I'll spend more money on
Mhm.
Amazon on things that, like, oh, that's a nice to have. Like I just want to try it and see. So I'll spend 30 or $40 here and 30 or
Mhm.
$40 there. And, not big amounts, but all of that really adds up once you add it all together.
Yeah, and the reason why I mention that is because I know for my clients and even for myself personally, like when we did end up making that shift in our spending, we take a lot longer time to decide on like purchases, and it's not normally exciting purchases, or maybe it's because we're getting older, it's exciting for us, but like kitchen cookware or whatever, like, man, I love these pans. Like I never would have thought I would have said that like 5 years ago, 10 years ago,
Yeah.
but because like I was choosing not to spend elsewhere, spent a little bit more. They're not top of the line by any means, but they're a lot nicer than that King Supers brand that we had when we first moved out here. So like
Yeah.
when we look at these like decisions that, yeah, they took a chunk of money, normally not something that we would have been excited about purchasing 5, 10 years ago. Like we look at it and we're like, man, that's like the best investment ever. We
Yeah.
bought an Instapot a couple months ago, and I'm like, man, we're using the heck out of this, and we're
Yeah.
saving
Yeah.
money
Yeah.
too because we're not eating out and stuff. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think again, it's kind of like that emotional. If you control the situation a little bit more, you can be a little bit more proud of the choices you're making and be a little bit more confident too.
Yeah. And I remember I was probably 12 years old, and I forget what I was going to buy. I think it was, I mean, whatever a 12-year-old buys, like, I think it was like a paintball gun or something,
Oh,
and
geez.
so I was like saving, I mean, I grew up in the country, so we,
Yep.
our paintball fights, but I was saving up and I was like, I could get this like really cheap one, it was like $70, or I could get like the one I really wanted that was 150. And I was about to buy the cheap one. I remember my dad told me, he's like, Tyler, he's like, I remember when I was a kid, like a lot of times I would buy the cheapest thing and then you'd use it for 4 times or 5 times and it would break. And I'd end up spending more money,
Yep.
and I don't know why that stuck with me, but it stuck with me. And so now it's like, okay, do I really want the cheapest? If is it a one-time use thing, or do I, want to pay a little extra money? Like another example is I went to New York back in October, September, October with my wife. And, we tried to save a little bit of money on the hotel, but we ended up staying like a ways away from where we wanted to be. Then we had to, take the train to commute every day. So actually next week we're going to Paris, and the hotel we have is like, right in the middle. It's like, yes, we're going to pay some extra money,
Yep.
but it's fine because we know that the benefit that we're going to get out of that is far greater than having to, take the metro every day for an hour each way, or whatever that happens to be, to save, $50 a night, or, whatever.
Yeah, and I think those are both like two similar kind of examples, but still very different too. Because one's more of that convenience aspect and saying that not necessarily that it was a waste like the cheaper paintball gun could have been, but it's more of, well, there's all these other financial things that you had to do or commit
Mm-hmm.
to, or the inconvenience aspect with your trip to New York. That's, yeah, like you had to think about the whole picture, and that's definitely a big issue that people have across the board is they get so focused on one thing and then they really don't realize how much of a pain it's going to be sometimes, especially business owners, that convenience aspect. Well, like it's a big deal if you make a certain business decision to go with this product or service and you're committed. Well, what does that mean to like your next decision? Like, are you handheld, or like are you your arms tied behind your back now because you already made this direction? This only works with these types of services. It only integrates here. Otherwise, it's going to be additional cost, additional money. So, yeah, taking that time to think through the whole thing and not just be so focused uh, too narrowly on one particular thing, thinking that it's going to be a savings and ultimately it costs you more. I think that's one of the big problems sometimes people are surprised about too when they call. I do offer hourly services, but it's really tricky sometimes. I can't do it for everything because everything relates financially. There's all those big picture answers that or questions that need to be answered. And so if you focus too much before you have that big picture, and then you can kind of zoom in once you see, I see the whole map, let's focus on this part. And now if I need to, I can kind of look over there and see what's going on. But that's how most people make their decisions, just quick siloed decisions without thinking about the whole financial picture. And that's where they end up getting themselves kind of stuck in those situations, where ultimately it could end up costing them more, or they are really restricting the possibilities of what their future could look like because they bought a house that was way bigger than they needed to because the mortgage company said they could afford it because they don't care like how much they want you to pay as much interest as possible to them. And
sure. Yeah. As long as you keep paying, they win.
Yep.
So yeah, so then let's talk about, so for business owners and entrepreneurs, so people, so let's assume, okay, they got their business off the ground, like they're making at least a little bit of money, still obviously heavily investing in the business, but they're maybe a year or two in, things are going well. So they start looking out, 20, 30 years into the future, thinking about financial planning. What, I guess, guidance or what's maybe different for somebody who owns or runs their own business versus somebody who's a salary person or a salaried employee? How do you approach that differently from a financial planning standpoint?
Sure. So I think one thing we can hit on really quick, kind of, since we are looking at 20, 30 years out from a business standpoint, is just recognizing that businesses are different. And one of the things that we had talked about in one of our previous meetings that we connected on was the kind of thought process that you always need to be investing in your business. And so that depending on what your business is. 20, 30 years from now, most people probably would be like, I'm 32 now. So 30 years from now, I'm going to be 62. I would be thinking possibly about retiring at that point. Is my business a sellable asset? And what types of things would I have to do to make it a sellable asset? So that's something to be aware of, because if it's not a sellable asset, a lot of the investing that I could be doing, or some of the investment decisions I could be making into the business, are not going to pay off in the same way that making that alternative decision of investing in your business to kind of support it running and providing a good service, but then not pouring everything into it, because you are going to need some type of parachute to last 20, 30 years in retirement. So there's some businesses where it's very focused on an individual and it can't be sold. And if it can't be sold, you can't be relying on that to be your retirement plan. So I think that's important to be aware of. And there's things that you may need to do, especially if that window's tighter than that 20 or 30 year time frame. If someone's a little bit older or just wants to retire sooner and just kind of live off of the hard work that they've done so far, you have to take the proper steps to make your business look attractive and be sustainable without you. And some people do that by hiring teams. Unless it is just like a straight product, then sure, you could sell a product. So that's kind of the biggest thing, is just understanding what it is that you have and what that could do for that 20 or 30 years once you decide to walk away. And that will help you decide whether it does make actually sense. Are you actually investing in something that's going to be growing and going to be sellable, or you invest in something that's just paying you every single year as you have to work every single year?
Yeah. And I like that definition, because for me, it is always something I've struggled with, is do I take this money, right? And do I, because I can get some tax benefits if I stick it in, an IRA or something like that. Or I also get tax benefits if it's a business expense and I spend it on ads or on, paying employees. And there's always been a little bit of push and pull there, right? IRAs are what I would say, slightly, I don't want to say more secure, but in the sense of like there's a little bit more of a predictable result sometimes out of that, at least in the long run, right? A long enough time frame. Whereas employees, it's like, are they going to really pay off, or is the business going to continue to grow? Is this ad campaign going to work? And so you have those questions. But I like how you defined it is, are you growing the business to sell it, or just to, make additional income? Not that there's a wrong side, but if it's a sellable asset, then I think it makes much more sense to continue to invest in it, if you're going to be getting a much better return in the long run, or at least think that that's a possibility. I like how you kind of broke that up.
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes too is people don't have a clear rule of how they're going to pay themselves an income, and I imagine it depends on many different variations. But I think, at least for myself personally, I give myself a monthly paycheck, and that doesn't vary too much unless I add new clients or do something substantial to kind of warrant it. And so it's not, I take all the money that my business is making, because that would be not investing at all. I don't pour it all back into my business, because I'm still not sure if it is going to be a sellable asset. It starts to become more of a sellable asset if I build more infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
start building a team and stuff for my type of service style business. But if it's always going to be just me, it's going to have a very limited sale ability. And if you are pouring stuff in to just make more income that you're just going to pour back in, and you're never going to get the end result because you're just kind of building it up but then pouring everything in, it's basically like, let me try to think of a good kind of explanation of this. So you could just waste money, right?
Yeah.
So you could just burn it, and that could be just the equivalent of investing in something that's ultimately is never going to give you real value out that you're actually going to receive, because if you're constantly pouring it back in. So you really want to make sure that those investments are going to be worthy of some type of payoff, whether it's efficiency, so that you can grow bigger, and things like that. I think a lot of people don't really understand. They have they either provide a good service, or they understand a certain product, and things like that, but they don't understand kind of how to uh, understand if they're going to get a return on investment, basically.
Right.
And so then they start making poor decisions, just throwing money because they met someone that said they can do these things, but they don't really vet it. They don't know how to vet it. And so I think that's where a lot of business owners sometimes make mistakes, is they don't know how to analyze those different investments or expenses. Are they investments, or are they just expenses? Um, I guess is
Yeah.
how people need to be able to look at those things.
Well, I see that all the time on the marketing side, because good marketing is an investment because it grows your business, in the short term, hopefully in a trackable way, and in the long term. And
Yep.
I see so many people who, they're willing to spend money on the brand new pickup truck, or, whatever that thing happens to be for their business. But it's like, oh, spend $800 a month on marketing. It's like, well, that's the lease on your, brand new lifted F-350 that you're doing roofs with, or whatever. And then they get to a point where they're like, oh my gosh, my business isn't growing. What's going on? And I'm like, well, the pickup truck is great, and yeah, it's a better appearance and all that, but you could also be buying ads and getting exposure and getting leads, so that you can keep building, whatever it is that you're building. So I understand where you're coming from on that. And it's always I think it's an individual decision, right? And I think that's, talking to you, it's like, okay, it's different for every business, different for every person. Yeah.
Yeah, it varies. And I think it just kind of comes down to, again, looking at the whole picture, not just being like, a lot of emotion is going into purchasing that new truck. Then, like, I'm going to be able to see the truck.
Right.
That's a good emotion. It looks,
Drive it. People
yep.
think I'm cool. Yeah.
So are you investing in the business, or is that investing in your lifestyle? And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people get confused with that when you have your own business. A lot of those things overlap. So reinvesting in the business to grow the business, or reinvesting in the business to uh, grow your lifestyle. And again, very, very different things, but you can kind of put some makeup on it to make it look like one thing other than the other.
Yeah, I really like that because, yeah, I think a lot of business owners sort of, and I'm not saying I'm exempt from this, but you delude yourself or in saying, yeah, I'm growing the business, but these are all things that I really want or I want to do, and it's not having a direct impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, or the need. I'm glad you said want, because I think a lot of times people don't think of them as wants. A lot of times, uh, personal life, business life, I need this thing. Like, well, why do you need it?
Hmm.
Because it looks cooler. Like, oh, is it going to do the same thing as that other truck? Basically, like that other truck doesn't look too bad. Like, no, I need this new car.
Right.
Then they start getting to the spot, if they actually take a few seconds to think about it. I think that's another big thing, is people don't take the time to think. They just act off that emotion and that behavior. And you do that enough times, you start to create bad habits where you're not allowing yourself to process things and analyze things. Obviously, it's something I haven't had too much trouble doing. Sure, when it's emotional enough, um, I still can get clouded, but I just love analyzing things. So I don't mind taking time to just sit and just be like, what if this, what if that, what if this, best case, worst case, what's the most likely scenario? So I can do those things a lot quicker. But as people rely on those more snap judgments, as people rely on the click instantly to order and have it delivered the next day, it creates less thinking. And so your brain's not used to doing those things. So if you're not used to doing it, it is a little bit trickier to create those habits again, because your mind does get exhausted a lot faster than if you were always doing those kind of mental exercises that think through different processes. And processes is another thing. I think a lot of businesses just naturally, you get busy. You don't create processes. You don't look for efficiencies. Like those things are just wasting money if you don't have those things in place.
For sure. For sure. Okay. Got one more question for you, if you don't mind here. And then I want to have you share your URL and some other folks if people want to find you. So one of the things, if you watch any commentary on the markets right now, everyone's like, oh, it's been a bull market for so long. We're at the top of the market. Be very careful. As a financial planner coming in with people, does that change, whether that's true or not? I mean, we could debate that. I don't really know, right? Other than probably we'll have a recession at some point. But how does that change the way that you approach clients or approach client portfolios, if you will?
Yeah, so it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had early on. I agree with you. No one knows when it's going to happen. It's going to happen eventually, whether it's this year, next year, 10 years from now. I'm never going to try to act like I know anything more than what the experts know. And even the experts are always 50% divided. There's people that think we got many, many years of this still to come of a great, strong growth. And a lot of people for the last, probably for the last 7 years, people have been on that downside too, saying, nope, it's going to be horrible. And none of those people have been right for the last 7 years or so. And so no one really knows. And what I say, whether it's business owners or just individuals, is understand what your financial situation is today, like regardless of what's going on. And there's basic things that you need to do. You need to make sure that you are comfortable with any type of risk that's involved in investments. Today, make sure it's positioned in a way that you're comfortable with potentially that short-term loss. The only time you're going to have long-term losses is if you lock in those by making a foolish decision or thinking that we're never going to recover. So a lot of emotion drives the bad behavior, and really the losses that a lot of people recognize, it's all based on emotion because they freak out when they see those things. So make sure you're in a place of comfort and understanding of what your situation is. Because once you have that confidence of, I know what's going on, I know I have my emergency savings established, I know that what could possibly happen with my investment. So I'm not going to freak out when it does happen, because it is going to happen at some point.
Yeah. So managing the psychology of it, not just the financial impact of it.
Yeah. Psychology and just being aware of your kind of financial situation today and just being prepared as if it could happen today. And not really making changes, is just making sure that you understand what's going on because of that psychology and behavioral aspects that tend to show their head when we do experience those recessions.
Cool. All right, Lucas. Well, thanks a ton. Where can people find you if they want to either reach out to you, maybe as a client, or just have a conversation? I think you might do free calls. Am I making this up? Like if somebody's just getting started?
Yeah. So free intro call, just like anything. Like most of my clients are going to be a long-term relationship. So I want to make sure it's going to be a good fit, a good understanding of where the value could be had of working with me, and make sure all those things match up. So yeah, free complimentary call. If you listen to this and you thought it may be worth talking to me, you can schedule those directly on my website, which is LevelUpFinancialPlanning.com. And then I know a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn too. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Lucas Casarez. You'll see the CFP designation after my name.
Cool. All right. Well, Lucas, thanks a ton. This has been really, really fun. I appreciate your time.
Yep. Appreciate it, Tyler. Take care.
All right. And that's our interview with Lucas. Thank you so much for your time, Lucas. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. If you guys enjoyed the podcast, feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to get feedback from you. My email is Tyler, Tyler, at Analytive. That's ANALYTIVE. V is in Victor.com, Tyler at Analytive.com. Go ahead and shoot me an email of your thoughts, your feedback. And again, if you want to reach out to Lucas, LevelUpFinancialPlanning.com is the best way to do that. And we will talk to you guys soon. This has been the Analytive Podcast.